Hello everyone, I'm Angelo. I'm the host of the show Houses, where I talk about every house that I lived in. The first house was the house I grew up in Arlington, Virginia with my parents. Growing up, I slept on a mattress on the floor. It was in the basement, so it was a little bit, you know, like cockroach. I remember one time like a cockroach ran over me. It wasn't like super poor or anything, but it was like we just made do. It was a nice enough house, 3-story house with a basement, full basement, little back room with laundry and washing machine. And for a while it had a bathroom, but it was kind of like never fully functioning. And there was a boiler back there too. And I remember this big blue boiler that you never seen. Boilers anymore, they're like standing upright, but this one was like a mound. It was like curved back, and back then it was like huge to me. So like as like a 3-year-old or something, one of my earliest memories is running up to that boiler and trying to toss myself over it and just land on my stomach on it. So I slept on the floor first couple years, or on the mattress on the floor first couple years of my life, and my younger brother would sleep there next to me. And when I was around 5 or 6, my parents got a bunk bed upstairs on the 3rd floor, but I was so scared to sleep in it that I wouldn't sleep there, so I insisted on sleeping in the basement. That was compounded by the fact that, I saw some scary movies when I was a kid, and it really scared me, the idea of being upstairs, and it was somehow like vulnerable to be up there. Being in that house, I saw a lot of movies when I was young. We had a black and white TV with the knobs on it. We had a rotary phone, so to call someone, it was like like it would go back. And one of our earliest digital, like a phone with buttons on it, I always remember that sort of yellow green luminous buttons on it. This is 1985, by the way, when I was born, so a couple of years after that. I think I saw RoboCop 2 in black and white on the black and white TV. I remember when we got a Zenith TV. That was really nice because that was like the first time we had like a decent TV and a nice VCR. To this day, there's still a VCR in my old bedroom, the one that was upstairs. That's from 1985. And to like change stations to record, you had to like scroll a dial. You couldn't and like flip some switches. You couldn't even just switch. But that was how you recorded things back then. We didn't have TiVo. I say living in the house, it was a decent enough home in a nice neighborhood. I didn't realize how nice it was growing up because I hated DC. Like I was right by DC, and DC was miserable when I was growing up. It was like a dungeon going in there. It was very crowded, and as a kid I didn't understand that. It was hot in the winter, hot in the summer, cold in the winter. And I started going to school, and I was like, I didn't get what I was trying to learn. So when I was in kindergarten, I actually ran away from school. I hid my backpack. I made a plan to just hide my backpack under my coat, even though it wasn't that cold. And I just snuck out during recess. And the police ended up finding me like a couple blocks away because I was trying to go home. So I thought in my head, if I made it home, I wouldn't have to go to school anymore. It was like, I got out of there and proved like I don't need to be in school. I thought when I was in class and they would make us pray and stuff, and it was a Christian school, I was like, well, I love Godzilla and he destroys stuff, so I hate God and love the devil. And when we were singing hymns about God, I would sing Godzilla instead for the lyrics. When I was 17 in that house, I was staying in the house a lot. I went through a very stressful time when I was 17 for about a month, and then I had a panic attack that I was being ripped out of my body and God wanted to take me and destroy me. And that feeling lasted for another 18 months, and I was slowly consumed by that terror, and I was starting to be unable to function until right before I turned 18. I saw Panic Room on DVD by David Fincher, which I had seen many times, and it felt like I was being shot through a tunnel out the other end, and I saved my own life and realized I was an atheist. I no longer wanted to try and buy into religion or church, and I no longer believed in God. So I was living at home with my parents for the next couple years through college. College was pretty difficult, and then I dropped out. The classes were easy. They like babied us, but I didn't want to be there really. And I worked a job in college. I was a I was a manager at a movie theater. I started out as an usher. But I was having a tough time because when after I saw Panic Room, I thought, okay, good, I'm saved. I saved my own life. Now what do I do with my life? For the first time in my life, I'm admitting, I don't have my faith anymore. And the next few weeks and months, I started believing God had abandoned me and the devil was trying to possess me. And so I had very scary delusions that the devil was trying to possess me for the next 3 years. And like I was seeing pentagrams in my hands, and I was feeling this compulsive voice in me saying, "Hail Satan." And I was scared whenever I saw certain objects. I was afraid, like it was a bad time. 21, or 22, I was still living with my parents in the house in Arlington. Then at 22, I had another anxiety attack where I felt like God was trying to rip me out of my body again to be with him. It was terrifying. And I only got out of that after a year. I applied to like over 100 jobs, but I wasn't able to keep down a job. I was miserable, and I was under this terrible delusion that God was trying to destroy me. And it lasted until I got involved with this woman long distance, and she told me one day that the police came to her job and read an email they got from me saying I was going to hurt her, and put in details of how we knew each other. And I said, this wasn't me, I didn't do it. And I didn't know if she was like totally just like trying to break things off with me in some dramatic fashion, or if this really happened. But then a detective came over to my house later that day and talked to me about it, and he said, well, we're not going to charge you with anything, but just don't talk to her anymore. And it was, the next few months were really tough because she believed I did this, but she still wanted to be with me. So I had to walk this fine line of like wanting to sort of be close to her long distance, and yet she believed I was this dangerous person who threatened her. And I eventually ended up hiring a polygraph examiner to give me a lie detector test to prove I didn't do it. And he had it sent to her house. He mailed it to her house. I sold a bunch of DVDs to pay for it because I didn't have a job. And she got the results, and they showed I was being honest. And I realized polygraphs aren't like foolproof, but I went out of my way to prove I didn't do this. And the thing is, like, I called her and said, hey, I passed the polygraph, aren't you glad? And she was like, oh yeah. And I was like, what's wrong? You sound sad. And it turned out she had just lost her job because apparently somebody had called her job and left a voicemail saying similar things to what was in the email that was sent to the police. So there really was an email sent to the police. Now here's the thing. This woman knew I lived with my mom, and she sort of knew who my mom was, but it was a woman who called and left a voicemail. So I'm like, well, yeah, that's I was horrified that she lost her job. I mean, that was horrible. But I was like, well, now you obviously know it's not me, right? But she said, no, it sounds like your mom. I was like, there's no way my mom did it. She gave me a recording of it. I'm like, that's not my mom. My mom wouldn't know how to call you. She wouldn't, she never had your phone number. She didn't know who you were. And that's not her voice. And it sounded like a woman, like she was on prescription drugs or something, and saying similar stuff and saying stuff about me. Like, anyway, like it said I hurt her daughter. I have no idea who this woman was. And I can tell you that that didn't happen, whoever it was, because I had basically no involvement with women whatsoever in college, which is when she said your daughter went to school with your son, and I just didn't interact with women, basically. I was still at my home, and like I was panicking over this, and eventually I hired a private investigator who did a forensic scan of my computer to show I never sent that email. And he talked to me and said, well, who could have done this? And I was given a list of people, and I prepared a list and I was so paranoid at the time. I was just absolutely like paranoid that everyone's out to get me, because I'm like, who could have done this? I have no idea. Then he narrowed it down basically to the woman's ex-fiance who still lived with her and was in love with her. So he probably sabotaged things and maybe put some woman up to calling her and making her lose her job. That way she couldn't move out with him. And I was 23 when that happened. I was still living in my house with my parents for the next few years, and I'll just fast forward to washing cars at Enterprise Rent-A-Car. And my brother attacked me. Oh no, I quit the job at Enterprise, and my brother attacked me Christmas Eve 2011. He attacked my whole family. He attacked my youngest brother, my mom, me, and I have video of all that. And in 2006, I already had him convicted for assault and battery against me once. So I could have gone to the cops, but I just said, well, I'm gonna go move out. So I moved out with someone for 6 months, and unfortunately, one day he was walking towards the kitchen, and I was walking towards the kitchen, and he had a robe on, and he just dropped his robe and was fully naked and said, hello. And I just turned around and walked away, but I moved out of there shortly after. I don't think he knew what he was doing. I think he was like mentally affected. So like I don't think he even remembered doing that. He wasn't trying to do anything to me. He just wanted to walk to the kitchen naked. 2012, I moved back in with my parents, and I was there for a month or two. And I had quit my job at Enterprise. It stormed off the job already months earlier, so I was just doing videography. And again, parents' house, it was a little small for an adult like me, and living with my family and my two brothers, including the criminal, and my mom and dad. And I started traveling for videography work. I was shooting videos for an entertainment agency, and in a hotel in Atlanta in August 2012, all of a sudden I heard Lady Gaga's Bad Romance blare in my head, and I had an anxiety attack, and then I became disabled for 9 months from that, because I started having the hallucinations that God was trying to destroy me again. And so after a month, I wasn't able to work anymore, and then I couldn't drive because I knew I'd crash the car if I drove. Not deliberately ram it, but like I couldn't control my motor functions enough to know to stop it. So I was at a red light, and I was like, please, screaming at myself, keep my foot on the brake, because I wouldn't know how to like keep it there. And I had to pull over after the red light and call someone to come pick me up and leave their car and have someone else drive their car to my parents' house and me go there. And then I was really sick at my parents' house, and I couldn't work anymore. And I was really sick for a while, and then I lived in a mental hospital for like 4 or 5 days in around Columbus Day 2012. So what is that, like October? And it was there I met the most racist guy I've ever met. He would make fun of everybody's accents who worked at the hospital. And the mental hospital was Inova Fairfax, I think, by Merrifield Road. The staff were great. They treated us really well. But I lived in a small wing of like 2 hallways for a couple days. And that was like psychological torture for me. And they wouldn't even let me outside. And they took my razor and everything because, you know, suicide risk for everybody in that unit. And I was getting extremely sick, like out of my mind, delusional. It was very difficult to hold conversations because I was like, and I also met a rich lawyer from Dubai there, and we kind of became friends. And I left there after 4 or 5 days and went back home for the next 6 months. Now, the day after I came back, my heart was racing once I got out of the mental hospital. And it was racing for 24 hours. I literally couldn't sleep at home. I would stand by the bed, try and fall asleep, but I couldn't, because as soon as I started to nod off, I had so much of this energy in me, my heart was racing, I couldn't fall asleep. And after 24 hours, I was worried I was gonna die from that. So I had my dad take me to the hospital, the emergency room, and they gave me a shot of Ativan and slowed my heart down right away. I was like, thank goodness. And they said my heart rate was 120 beats per minute. So for 24 hours, my heart was racing 120 beats per minute. And still the next month, I had compulsive pacing at my parents' house. So basically, I would only go, if I could help it, from my bedroom to the bathroom, compulsively pacing about 23 hours a day, because I couldn't sleep. Because if I tried to lie down, I was in such pain, and I had this compulsive pacing. As soon as I lied down, I had to get up and pace again. And I paced 23 hours a day for about a month. About 6 months later, I started to come out of my disability. I was able to drive again. I worked, and I lived at my parents' house for the next 6 months or so until my brother attacked me again, because my dad was bedridden, and I was making him vegetable juice and getting him food like a coffee and donut and making him breakfast. I made him vegetable juice from a juicer I had, and that week the government furloughed workers. There was a government shutdown in 2013, and my brother was doing some government contracting work or something, and he didn't like it that I left the juicer out while I was giving my dad vegetable juice, because it would spoil if I didn't get him to drink it quickly. My dad, like, kind of stubborn, he won't take medicine unless you make him, not just stubborn, but a little forgetful. And he wouldn't drink the vegetable juice unless I watched him drink it. And the oxygen will spoil it within 30 minutes. You'd lose the nutrients. So I would sit there and make him drink it. My brother didn't like that I left the vegetable juicer out while I was doing that, so he threw it out in the backyard. Well, I saw I was missing, and he complained to me about it. I was like, oh, great. And so I went, but then next time I saw him, he was out in the backyard. So I went in the backyard. I turned on my camera because I knew I was going to confront him. I confronted him. He punched me and pushed me onto my knees and hands, even though I was still filming with one hand. And he got on my back and choked me. And after that, and he was saying stuff like he was going to call the police, but he wasn't going to. So after that, I went to the police station, showed him the video, and they arrested him on assault and battery and a federal strangulation charge. And I knew I had to move out that night. So I stayed at a friend's parents' house for a month, and my brother got convicted, And then I moved out of my friend's parents' house and got 2 jobs working nights as a bouncer. The next house I lived in, I found on Craigslist. The landlord didn't charge a deposit, so it was like one of the only places I could get. It was in Falls Church. It was a kind of a big house, but it was in like a neighborhood where you couldn't really walk around. And this was fall of 2013. I moved in with an 89-year-old Baptist pastor, and pretty soon he was talking to me about like how his son was gay, and he put him in the hospital to try and make him straight. And this was like the second day I knew him, and I was like, why are you telling me this stuff? And he said all this like obsession with like being gay and insect, and nothing wrong with that, by the way, totally valid. My issue was like he's throwing this at me and asking me to dinner every day, and telling me how disgusted he was that after his wife died, women were trying to have sex with him. And one day he asked if he could get in the shower with me, and I said no, and he said like, I'm just kidding. But I was really annoyed by him every day when I'd walk past his office to make breakfast, and he'd be like, hello, Angelo, how are you doing today? I was like, shut up. He kept bothering me and asking me to dinner every day. I was really annoyed because I was exhausted. I was still having trouble sleeping at this point, even though I'd come out of my disability. I was sleeping 3 or 4 hours a night. And one day he asked me to set up his nativity scene on the deck of his house, which was on the 2nd floor, so where I was living, past his office. And so I had to go downstairs, and he watched me. It was kind of a creepy sight, like him standing over me while I crawl under the stairs, lie down, pull out these giant figurines of like, you know, Mary and Joseph and the 3 wise men, and carry them through his office. And he said, okay, they're all down there. You just take them, walk them through my office, put them on the patio. Well, I kept walking back and forth through there, and then one time I noticed there's 2 letters put on his desk that are strategically placed like this. And there was a drawing coming out of one of the letters. And I walked past it, I had it maybe once or twice, and I was like, huh, the drawing looks kind of like a candle. I wonder what that is. And I pulled it back, and it was a drawing of 2 guys having sex. Now again, if it's consensual, totally fine, completely valid. But I think he was like testing to see whether he could, you know, like whether I was going to be into it or not. And it really grosses me out, that thought. And then I saw, and I put all the pieces together. But no, I didn't put all the pieces together yet because I was still in denial. I was like, well, I knew he corresponded with prisoners. I was like, well, maybe he's just writing them to tell them that he thinks this is wrong, which again, I don't think at all. And I was disgusted that he thought that. But I was like, well, I was in denial in my head. I was like, huh, this is so weird. I was taking in so much info. And I see on his bookshelf, like books about like preaching to a gay congregation and gay theology and stuff. And after a little while, I figure, oh, he's living a double life. He's pretending to be straight, but he's gay. And that's sad, you know. People shouldn't have to do that. But I moved out at the end of that month. January 1st, 2014, I moved into a house in Annandale, the famous house that I hated. I worked at 2 jobs, so basically 7 nights a week for 6 months, and I was very miserable and lonely. I was having trouble sleeping. The house had problems, so the dishwasher never worked from day one. Roommates were gross. I had a roommate who would cook stuff, just smelled horrible. I don't know if he cleaned out his countertop oven. The kitchen was nice and big, and it was in a townhouse complex. So it was this brown home in a little townhouse complex off of Backlick Road, and you had to cross 4 lanes of traffic, 40 miles an hour to get to the other side of the street where I could park in front of people's houses. And I was exhausted coming home from work and having to cross 4 lanes of traffic and make sure I don't get hit. And people would get hit and killed around the Annandale area on the street, pedestrians. But I hated living there. It was freezing cold in the winter. It was like an ice box, a sweat box in the summer. I eventually adapted by getting a big comforter in the winter and had a heater running next to me. The only good thing about that house, the power never went out. Virtually never. It did go out when somebody crashed into a telephone pole in my neighborhood, which apparently was somewhat regular thing. You could see the glass from cars and the imprints in the telephone poles where people would crash into them. But otherwise, the power never went out, even though everything else about this neighborhood sucked. It was miserable. There was no entertainment. It was horrible to walk in, dangerous. The traffic was god awful, and my landlord was not very nice. And so I had one roommate who kept taking my stuff. He was a subletter, so he wasn't even on the lease. He literally kept taking my stuff, and I caught him with it. And eventually, I confronted him, told him, "Don't take my stuff," and he wanted to fight me. And I told the landlord, I said, "Look, either he leaves or I do." And eventually, so she evicted him because of that, and other people in the house were complaining. But she didn't want to have to do that. She was a really horrible person. So 2.5 years later, I made a video about how much I hated living there, and I put my whole address in it, and it got like 100,000 views on YouTube. And then she found out about it, and she really didn't like that. She started calling me and texting me, but there was nothing she could do. Like, the news was starting to cover it. The Washington Post called her family to get their side of the story because they were the owners of the house. I was showing how things like, I came home one night and the door was open at like 3 in the morning, and the front doorknob was gone. And I just thought, oh, subletter must have screwed up the door. And I walk inside, and the doorknob's sitting in someone's shoe on the shoe rack. I try and put it back in. It won't go in, so I just put it down, put the deadbolt on, and that's how we used the door for a while. I told the landlord, and she didn't fix it, so I just super glued the doorknob back on there, and I put that in the video about the house, in addition to one of my roommates having like constant diarrhea, apparently, and not cleaning the toilet. So it would not only stain the bowl, and it was disgusting, and like mold was growing on it, but it would somehow get on the underside of the seat, and I have no idea how that's possible. But he wouldn't clean that at all, and it was absolutely disgusting. So that was in the video too. It was in the video how subletters would like bring like people over and like leave diapers out and dirty or women's underwear. They would shit in the toilet in the guest bathroom and not flush, and they would use up all the toilet paper. So I took all the toilet paper out of there because I used to use that one because I didn't like the bathroom that my other roommate was using, the one who got diarrhea all over it. And I yelled at him about that at one point, and my other roommate locked the bathroom and said, "You can't use it until you clean up." But when the video got popular about the house, I was showing everything that was wrong with it, the ugly beanbag chair my landlord brought in, how my roommates weren't really that cleanly, and the problems I had over the years with my landlord ignoring stuff, and she kind of admitted to it all in text messages. And so then I moved out of there. The next place I moved in was about July of 2016. I moved into a room in Arlington, which was a really nice room. It was big, and I had a private bathroom for the first time in my life. So that was really luxurious to me, and I was almost in shock how nice it was. It was a 2-level house, but I think the second level was added after the first level was built. Really nice, in a cul-de-sac, like, so basically no traffic. I could park right in the front of the house for once in my goddamn life, and it was like just a nice area. I was almost in shock when I moved there, like how nice it was. I couldn't get used to that fact. But over time I came to resent living there and resent my landlord and roommates because I can't live with people. I had a roommate who, her unemployed boyfriend would come over, and apparently he just decided to live there, and I didn't even know. So like, this guy was coming over. I didn't know who he was. I didn't know if he was part of their family or what. And he would just sit outside my door every day for like 6 to 8 hours, listening to podcasts and laughing and ordering fast food. And it was really annoying. And it annoyed me because he knew everything I was doing. And then other roommates came in. I had one roommate who would sing this god-awful shriek like she was a sick bird or something. I mean, just this bizarre, like, oh, oh, like an eagle in distress or something. It was so annoying, and I came to really resent it, and I didn't say anything about it. I kept to myself, and I kept looking for other places, but I couldn't afford anything. That place was already expensive enough, and I got a break on the rent because I was paying $760 a month in rent, but the landlord was cool, and she fixed stuff promptly, but she charged so low because she owned the house, and I don't know if she owned any other houses, but it wasn't like the landlord in Annandale, who apparently owned more than one house, and this was just like a business to her. My landlord lived with me, so that was nice because like she actually cared about the place, but it was getting too cramped, and I didn't like how everyone would party and sing. I hate singing in houses. I hate singing indoors because that to me is like you're just pleasuring yourself in front of everybody. And do you want me to pleasure myself in front of everybody? That's sick. Nobody wants that. I hate it. This like exposing yourself, like showing your ass basically. So I didn't like that. and I decided I'm either going to sleep on people's couches or move into my car. And I tried sleeping on a guy's couch. I knew him from Safeway. He was a cashier there, and I'd been talking to him for a while. And he said, oh, it'll probably be the best place I ever slept in. Well, I went there, and it was a goddamn nightmare to sleep in. The place was full of cat poop. He apparently let neighborhood cats go into his basement. It was creepy. It smelled god-awful because the cat poop would like aerate the place. There were bugs in there, and it was an unfinished basement. And I was scared of the furniture. I was scared to breathe the air. I thought it would damage my lungs. So I slept in my car in his driveway that night. After like 2 hours, I couldn't take it. It smelled so bad. And after that, I started sleeping in my car. So now I don't live in a house. For the last 10 months, I've been living in a 2005 Honda Civic.